Welcome back to Behind the Universe, Raw vs. SmackDown, WWE 2K16 Part 2. If you missed the first part, be sure to check that out before going on with this one. Last time we left off with King of the Ring, so we're going to be picking right up with Battleground. So Battleground starts off with a Raw tag team matchup featuring Dean Ambrose and Sami Zayn taking on Wesley Blake and Buddy Murphy. This match stems from the interference at Night of Champions, where Blake and Murphy ambushed Ambrose following his steel cage match with Seth Rollins. And then, of course, at King of the Ring, Blake and Murphy got involved in the finals, and Dean Ambrose came down to stop that interference. So there was a little bit of build-up going into this from the last two big shows. Of course, with Night of Champions, King of the Ring, and Battleground, there were 3 pay-per-views, all in the span of a single month. You obviously had Night of Champions, which was the September show, and then October had both King of the Ring and Battleground. Now, as far as pacing went at the time, this definitely did slow things down. I wasn't able to, by adding in this extra show, it stopped me from perhaps reaching the Royal Rumble, which is something I could have possibly done if it wasn't for, if I hadn't also thrown in King of the Ring. So, it was a rough patch, at least for me, to edit everything. And like I said before, this was also the time where I was finishing up high school, getting ready to go off to college, getting all the planning together over the summer. Well, just as before the summer. Survivor Series wasn't as big of an issue because it was summer, so I had more free time to get the thing done. But at this point, I think Night of Champions had come out in February. King of the Ring might have finished up in sometime in April, and then Battleground was maybe late May. But yeah, there was a bit more of a gap. And obviously because it was 1 month, that meant that I only had 2 weeks of Raw and SmackDown in between. Now obviously, after Night of Champions, most of the build-up was going into Battleground. But King of the Ring also served to, it had its own payoffs, but also give a bit of build-up to Battleground, which worked for this tag team matchup. Sami Zayn joining forces with Dean Ambrose. This gave me something to do with Sami Zayn, because before this point, he wasn't really up to much. He showed up in the championship scramble at SummerSlam, but I didn't really have a program for him, so I paired him up with Dean Ambrose, and then obviously, with him aligning with Ambrose here, that would make him basically first in line for the 5-on-5 to join Team Ambrose, because obviously Sami Zayn had formed a bit of an alliance with Ambrose, and they worked together here at Battleground, although they were defeated by Blake and Murphy. This would set up when it comes to a 5-on-5, with Seth Rollins, he obviously has his recruited henchmen, but for Dean Ambrose, he just kind of has to put together a ragtag team of people who've had history with Seth in the past, anyone who would have a bone to pick with him, and that's what he ends up doing. He puts together Sami Zayn because of their alliance here, so Sami Zayn's really his right-hand man, so to speak. But as far as this tag team matchup goes, it was a really hype opener. It was a good job at really quickening the pace, getting starting off the show on the hot foot, starting it off on a good note. You had a lot of Daredevil spots. Dean Ambrose doing his trademark suicide dive through the ropes. Sami Zayn doing his spectacular DDT. So both men got to show their stuff. They looked very dominant, but at the same time, having Blake and Murphy get the win in the end, you might say, with Dean Ambrose, he does lose a lot over the course of this feud with Seth Rollins, and that was kind of the point. That's what I was going for with him, was that he would constantly fail to get these victories, at least at first. Once he, following the 5-on-5 Survivor Series match, Ambrose will start picking up victories when he returns from his suspension, and he'll start building himself up to fight Seth again. But here, the whole thing is that Ambrose just wants to get his hands on Seth, but now he's got to fight through Rollins' team. So here he goes up against Blake and Murphy, and if I had Blake and Murphy lose here, they would look incredibly weak, and that would basically kill any future momentum they could have, at least for the foreseeable future, because if you debut a tag team, and their first match, especially their first pay-per-view match, they go up and lose, well, what do you do with them after that? They would just kind of fall to the wayside. And the thing about having a team with Seth Rollins, he has a group of henchmen, but you gotta be careful doing that, because in those scenarios, usually the henchmen are the guys who they'll kind of serve as cannon fodder at certain points. They'll be the ones to take the falls. It's a way to protect the main guy, the leader, make him still look good, make him look strong. But at the same time, you can't just job everybody out, especially not Blake and Murphy. Like, it would be different with someone like Kane or Big Show, because they're veterans. They could easily bounce back from a loss. They could afford it. But when you're just debuting and this is your first real big spot, your big opportunity to show what you can do, cannot afford a loss here. So giving the win to Wesley Blake and Buddy Murphy was a smart decision, but at the same time, Ambrose and Sami Zayn get off a few big shots, so they don't look totally incompetent. If I recall correctly, I think Sami Zayn took the pinfall here. Yes, he did. Sami Zayn was the one. He got hit with the combination Brainbuster Frog Splash, and he took the pin here, which is a risky move, because, yeah, I don't want Ambrose to take the fall, because I still want Ambrose to look, I don't want him to look completely weak, so by bringing in a partner and having Zayn take the fall instead of Ambrose, it works in protecting Ambrose, but at the same time, there's a fine line to walk with that, because in bringing in Sami Zayn just to take the pin, that definitely does make him look weak. However, I think he had an impressive enough performance in this tag team match that he could afford the pin here. I think it was fine. So I don't really have any qualms with that. And obviously, again, this is building into the 5-on-5. So not only is there a story leading into this matchup, but there's a story coming out of it. So very strong opener to the show and a very strong point in favor of Monday Night Raw. Following that, I believe, was the Intercontinental Championship title match between Kevin Owens and Titus O'Neil. Now, I might get some of these wrong with the match card order. Obviously, with the footage I have in the background, I could always just leave a note like, hey, I got this wrong. Or maybe I'll get lucky and I can kind of change around the wordings, which I have done. I remember in the last episode, I was kind of confused about the last one. I was confused, like, the order. Technically, the Roman Reigns Bray Wyatt came before the championship scramble match, but I got that out of order. Sometimes I might get it wrong, just because the way I have things laid out here in my document, I don't have it chronologically. I have it chronologically, but I have it divided by brand, so I don't know which brand match came before which brand match, but it's whatever. It's not too huge of a deal. If it's anything super significant, like I've said before, like how you can structure a match card to really build the tone throughout the show and carry a sense of progression throughout it. But when that's super important, I don't feel like I need to break that down in each individual show. When it is super important, like with WrestleMania, I'll be sure to make that known. But like I kind of already did that with WrestleMania in one of my other videos. I did that in the Universe Mode 101 thing, I believe. So, yeah, it's the Intercontinental title match, Kevin Owens versus Titus O'Neil. This matchup was initially set up to be a triple threat. It was going to be Kevin Owens versus the former champion Cesaro versus the other former champion Titus O'Neil, both men using their rematch clauses at the same time. It was going to be a triple threat, but there was a story going with Paul Heyman where he pulled Cesaro from the match because, Cesaro going over to SmackDown, he was kind of like Raw's representative, really showing what the Red brand could do in the face of the enemy, but he, of course, lost the title to Kevin Owens, so SmackDown took their IC title back. So Paul Heyman kind of took it out on Cesaro. He pulled him from the Intercontinental title match because he didn't want Cesaro to disappoint Raw again, so he didn't even give him the opportunity. And instead, he booked him in a triple threat United States Championship Open Challenge match later in the show, which I will get back to. So that's what leads to this just being a singles match between Owens and Titus O'Neil. And then, of course, Kevin Owens defeats Titus O'Neil here, a very back-and-forth contest. Not a whole lot going out of it here, because obviously this will set up the Survivor Series triple threat, in a sense, because Titus had won the King of the Ring tournament, so I felt as though he could afford a loss here, because he was King of the Ring winner, so it might have been nice to have him look strong going into Survivor Series with a big pay-per-view win at Battleground. But at the same time, having him reclaim the Intercontinental Championship from Owens, who only just won the title, I don't think that was the right decision either. I think it was a smart call to have Owens retain the title here. And as well, I wouldn't want Owens to lose by, like, disqualification or countout or something, because obviously, you know where Kevin Owens ends up. He's the longest reigning champion in the series to date. But and it seems like that's going to keep extending. He's broken the record now, and it's just a matter of time until, he eventually loses that title. So, having him start off on kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Have him start off on, like, shaky ground is not very good, especially knowing that he's going to be, the longest reigning champion in the series, at least at the moment. So having him show up here and lose in a disqualification or, retain in a weak way, I think it's a disservice to his character. I don't think that would have benefited him in any way. But having Titus lose here, I think is fine, because obviously you have Kevin Owens beat the number one contender for the WWE Championship, the King of the Ring winner. So it gives more of a reason for Kevin Owens to be inserted into that WWE title main event at Survivor Series. Because, yeah, he did look strong. He beat Cesaro and Titus, the former, he beat the Intercontinental and the United States champion in the span of, 2 weeks. So not only does he just vacate the Intercontinental title to, he trades it in for a title shot, but he does have something to back that up. There is truth behind his idea that he should be in the main event scene, because he did beat the two mid-card champions, so, I mean, really, he didn't really belong in that spot on the card. He had already done what he needed to do, so it made sense for him to get called up. Which, yeah, the win here over Titus strengthens that claim. So, really, I think this was a good match. As far as a story going into it, it's not really. It's just Titus has the rematch clause. So that could have been a bit stronger. It could have been a bit more personal, but I think it's fine, because this was the stepping stone to make Survivor Series more personal. Having Kevin Owens show up after having beaten Titus, and also taking away his contractually obligated one-on-one WWE title match that he got by winning the King of the Ring tournament, yeah, it definitely makes the Survivor Series triple threat more personal. You've already got the connection between Owens and O'Neal, and neither superstar really had much of a strong tie to Brock Lesnar at this point. No real personal stakes there. So developing that connection between Owens and O'Neal, I think, made this, again, it strengthened the Survivor Series match. Since nobody had a real tie to Lesnar, it prevents it from just being two guys getting a shot at the title, because there is now a personal rivalry between Owens and O'Neal on top of that. So I definitely say that is a point in SmackDown's favor. There's nothing wrong with this matchup. I mean, yeah, it's Owens and Titus, so maybe it wasn't the most, a technical, spectacular display of technical wrestling, but, I mean, it's fine. It did what it had to do. Then we had Seth Rollins versus Rusev. Or was it Neville versus Jericho that came next? I don't know, I'm going to say it was Seth Rollins versus Rusev. This, of course, coming off of the King of the Ring tournament, where Rollins screwed Rusev during the quarterfinal match. He screwed him out of the victory. Big Show and Kane played a distraction, so they are banned from ringside for this matchup. It's just Seth Rollins versus Rusev, and of course Rusev gets the win here, which I think it was good, because Rusev, he's coming off of a loss at Night of Champions, where he lost to Randy Orton. He got screwed over by Seth in the King of the Ring tournament, which was another loss on his record. He lost the number one contenders triple threat that also included Edge leading up to Night of Champions. And of course, way before that, he lost to Ryback at Payback. So Rusev had been fairly unimpressive in his pay-per-view performances. So having him come out here at Battleground and get a win over the red-hot Seth Rollins, I think it was smart. It put Seth in check a bit. And while, yes, it does kind of derail his momentum a bit, I think it was a worthy sacrifice, because Seth is going to come back at Survivor Series and get that win back immediately, pretty defiantly as well. So having Rusev win here, it was more important to make Rusev look strong, and as well as that, setting up the personal rivalry between Rusev and Rollins, this gives Ambrose another ally that he can call upon for the 5-on-5 Survivor Series match. So this matchup, I mean, I guess it's maybe not be perfect, that maybe Seth shouldn't have lost going into Survivor Series. Would have made his dominance look all the more, dominating. But I think it was good. I don't have really many issues with it. Maybe not quite as strong as the tag team match between Ambrose, Zayn, and Blake and Murphy, but I think it was good. It's another point in favor of Raw. Then there was the non-brand exclusive tag team championship match between The Ascension and Finn Balor and Hideo Itami. And this is where things get interesting, because The Ascension, honestly, up till this point, their tag team title reign was pretty lackluster. There was no real personal investment in any of the matches they had, because at Night of Champions, they just took down Kid and Swagger. At SummerSlam, they took down The New Day, and 2 victories over the Usos. So really, the biggest claim to fame that they had was their victory over the Wyatt family. But there was no personal like rivalry in any of their feuds. They just kind of would knock down challengers. It was just they would become number one contenders and then lose. But here, Finn Balor and Hideo Itami step up and they take the tag team titles. Again, this one isn't really personal. It was just the Ascension. They had a pretty weak title reign, despite having one of the longer tag team title reigns in the series. They just didn't really do enough with the belts other than defend them, which, I mean, they're not the worst. Like, I've definitely booked worse champions than the Ascension, but I'd say this is probably the bare minimum you can do with the title reign is just have them defend the belts in title matches. Like, I mean, usually if you want to have a good champion, they do need to defend the title. They need to have a pretty good lengthy reign, but there also needs to be something of note in those title defenses. Some sort of personal rivalry with some other superstar to really, really strengthen that. Even just one memorable match is, I think, enough to have a good title reign. I would say the Ascensions was just merely decent because, yes, they did defeat the Wyatt family and that made them look strong right off the bat, but following that, they just didn't do enough. All they did was defend the titles, and then they lose to Balor and Itami here. It's not really a personal match. Their rematch happens like a week or... I think it's the next week on main event, because I kind of just wanted to get them out of the tag team title picture. I didn't want to do a rematch for the tag titles, and I guess that just kind of goes to show what my thoughts were of the Ascension at the time, because I'd brought them in, and I thought I was going to book them really strongly, but I didn't do enough to really flesh out their characters. They were just the big monster heels as the champs, and then, Balor and Itami beat them, and I didn't really know where to go with the Ascension from here, so they lose their rematch on main event the next week, and they just kind of disappear until Fastlane, when they'll come back for the tag team gauntlet, but even at that stage, it's more so that the Ascension, they exist purely on their reputation, rather than, their character progression or development, or anything like that. So, taking the belts off of the Ascension, I think, was smart, because then you have this kind of makeshift tag team between Balor and Itami, which, while some of their title reigns... I mean, no, at least with Balor and Itami, they had a more impressive title reign, a more memorable title reign, but even just looking at the foundation of the team, they're not just undefeated people. Like, they had come in as singles stars, but they joined forces, so they're not as cohesive of a team as some of the... Like, I don't play it up as dissension or anything like that, but they were both single superstars joining forces, which is something that I rarely did in the series up to this point. I think the last time I had a team like that win the tag team titles, that was back with Jack Swagger and Zack Ryder. And that was back in WWE 13. And yeah, their title reign wasn't all that great either. I mean, they would lose it to Tons of Funk, who would then lose it to the Wyatt family, and then, that was kind of the end of that. For a while, I really never did anything with the tag team titles. It was just kind of another belt to have there, and it would just be the challengers would step up to fight the champions. Because even if you think about it, the Wyatt family's reign, if not for the matches with the Shield, I mean, really, what of note happened with the Wyatt family as tag team champs? Not a whole lot. Yeah, they have an impressive 196 days, so it's a high number, one of the longest title reigns in the series to date. But as far as memorable title defenses go, there weren't really many there. At least with when the primetime players will take the belts, at least then they kind of have a thing with the Dudley Boys. They have a bit of a program there, so there's like a personal thing there. Even that, there's like more emotion behind that than anything really that I had done before. Balor and Itami will kind of had something similar with Blake and Murphy before going into the big Fatal 4-Way tag team matchup at WrestleMania, but I'll get back to that in due time. But in this matchup, it was, giving Balor and Itami the titles was the right move. Was it like the best match on the card? No, not by a long shot, but it was serviceable. It was decent, kind of just like the Ascension's title reign, but nothing too much of note to speak of here. Then we have another Raw singles match. It's Christian versus Edge. Now, I've talked about this one in the past, but this was obviously both Christian and Edge had shots at the world title against Dolph Ziggler, but then Ryback took the title, so they were both open to get another title match, but they just kind of had to get some victories behind them to establish their credibility again. With Edge, he got the shot right off the bat because he won the number one contenders triple threat match, but Christian had to do a little more to get into the spotlight. And eventually that led to the breakdown between Edge and Christian. The allies, their tag team fell apart, and it led to this match at Battleground, where Christian, I guess, was just kind of jealous of Edge, and he wanted the next title shot, and eventually, he just kind of turned his back on Edge. We get this matchup, and Christian basically just uses Edge as a stepping stone. He defeats Edge here, and by defeating Edge, this will then catapult him into a World Heavyweight title match with Ryback. And there's a bit of like a consequence for Christian here, because he will get the world title match that he wanted, but at the cost of his friendship with Edge. So Christian is definitely making sacrifices here to get what he wants, and definitely, I mean, this is he had been a heel prior to this. He turned heel against Dolph Ziggler, but this was a way to kind of turn Edge face, because Christian had just stabbed him in the back and really just used him to get what he wanted, to get that world title match. So Christian just throws Edge to the wayside. Edge will disappear after this, and Christian moves on to fight Ryback. So it does kind of, and then plus you have the history between Christian and Ryback over the Intercontinental title, which will make their Survivor Series match all the more personal. But this matchup, it did what it needed to. It was a good building block to better things, but the match itself, the rivalry itself, it was more so steeped in history, less so there was like a big rivalry building up to it. It was just kind of like Christian turned on Edge, and mostly it was riding on the coattails of their history in the series as a team. Like everything that had gone down for the since WrestleMania, I should say. So like Extreme Rules, Over the Limit, Payback, Money in the Bank, how they had all those title shots. It was mainly riding off the coattails of that and using that as the big fuel for the fire. So I don't really think that it needed to have a whole lot of focus in the month leading up to it. But I think maybe a little extra attention might have helped it a bit more, helped it stand out. Definitely was not the match of the night, but I'd give it a point in Raw's favor. Really, that's the thing with, this pay-per-view might not have, it doesn't reach the same highs as a lot of the other shows that have come before, but it definitely does not come nearly as close to hitting any of the lows that the other shows do. So it's going to be interesting to see where I rank Battleground once I'm done with this. Then we have the United States Championship Triple Threat Open Challenge. This is where Baron Corbin and Samoa Joe make their debuts. The interesting thing about this is that obviously Cesaro comes out first, but then I had Baron Corbin show up second. So, because here's the thing, if I had Samoa Joe come out second, nobody would have cared about Baron Corbin. Like, oh, it's Baron Corbin, but Samoa Joe's here. So I had Corbin come out second. He's the middleman, and he's kind of the guy who gets overlooked when Samoa Joe makes his debut. But at least then, when he first comes out, it's like, oh my god, that's Baron Corbin. He's here. He's here in the series making his debut. So he does at least get a bit of a moment. That, of course, gets taken away by Samoa Joe. But in a way, that does sort of catch the audience by surprise later on when, Baron Corbin, seemingly the forgotten second man, he's going to be the one to walk away with the title. So I definitely think the way that I kind of set up the entrances there, I knew that Samoa Joe was going to get the bigger pop, but I did try to put a bit of a spotlight on Corbin. I wouldn't say that it spoiled that Corbin was going to win in me doing that. I think, if anything, if I had Corbin come out last, I think that might have given it away a bit more, because then it's like, well, it's Cesaro, and here's Samoa Joe, and oh yeah, there's also Baron Corbin, but Samoa Joe. I mean, that really would have kind of given away that, hey, well, maybe Corbin's going to sneak in, maybe he'll be the dark horse, but he at least gets his little moment beforehand. This matchup was pretty good. It was just a standard triple threat for the most part. You get some interesting back and forth between Cesaro and Corbin. I think Corbin and Joe have some spots. You might get Cesaro and Joe as well. Of course, Cesaro hits Joe with a neutralizer on the outside to take him out of commission. He runs into the ring, gets hit with the End of Days, and that's a wrap. Baron Corbin pins Cesaro, and thus ends the United States Championship reign of Cesaro right before he could break the record. Now let me talk about that for a minute, because when it comes to the record for the longest reigning champion in the series, for a while it seemed like I was very hesitant to break that record, because you think about it, Ryback had it with the Intercontinental title at 196 days. That title reign came to an end at WrestleMania 2K15, where Titus O'Neil won the thing. But then going along, you have the Wyatt family get pretty close. They hit 196 days, but as soon as they do, they lose the titles to the Ascension at Over the Limit. So they fail to surpass the record. You have Titus and Cesaro who are getting pretty close, but of course they fight each other in the title versus title match. Cesaro beats him, so Titus falls short at 168 days. And then you have Cesaro who 1 month later, 2 weeks later, he loses the Intercontinental title to Kevin Owens. Then he loses in the King of the Ring tournament in the semifinals. And then finally, you complete his descent when he loses the title here at Battleground and fails to break the record. He simply ties it yet again at 196 days. And of course, it's not going to be until Kevin Owens would surpass the record. The thing about Kevin Owens is that because I added an extra week between WrestleMania and Extreme Rules, he technically surpassed it a week before Battleground, because now his title reign, the night after Battleground, his title reign stands... Well, I'm talking Battleground 2K17 now. But his title reign currently stands at 203 days as of the night after Battleground, whereas if that extra week wasn't there, he would still be at 196 days, so he would not have surpassed that just yet. But yes, Kevin Owens has broken the record now, but it took a long time to do it. Over a year for that record to be broken, even though I had several opportunities to break Ryback's record in the meantime. I'm not quite sure why. I really don't know. With Cesaro, it just kind of... That's just how it worked out with the number of days, is that he would fall short. But yeah, I don't really know why it took me so long to break Ryback's record. I guess it was just a matter of circumstance. I don't know if I wanted to preserve that record. See, originally, actually, I can talk more about Ryback's world title reign later on. But yeah, he fails to break the record. It was a good match for Raw. Again, I'd say another point in their favor. It was about time that I took the title off of Cesaro, because the Open Challenge had kind of run its course. To avoid having that become stale, because at this point then, you look at SummerSlam, you had the big championship scramble and a 2 out of 3 falls Open Challenge, really just, because then I'm starting to run out of ideas, because otherwise then it comes down to the strength of his opponent, but there's only so many credible opponents who can fight Cesaro for the title and also lose, so there was only so many ways I could spin that, and then at Night of Champions, there just is no Open Challenge. He fights in the title versus title match. Then he gets caught up in the King of the Ring tournament, so again, no Open Challenge. And this is the final way to really have that be, to give that a send-off, is that he is forced into this Open Challenge triple threat, and then he loses. And then, of course, Baron Corbin declares that the Open Challenge is dead, supposedly to establish him as a heel, because Cesaro was a babyface, and he put on all these incredible matches, but Corbin's not going to do that. Corbin says you got to earn your title shots, and he takes that away, so he's the bad guy. Then we jump back to SmackDown with the No, wait, actually, I'm forgetting. There was, in the meantime, there was Adrian Neville versus Chris Jericho. Now, this matchup, if I was booking this nowadays, this matchup did not need to take place on a pay-per-view, to be perfectly honest. It's pretty forgettable in comparison to everything else. Not much of a personal story going into it. What had happened was, obviously, the two men lost in the King of the Ring tournament. They were knocked out in the first round. So Jericho's kind of getting fed up of losing, and then on an episode of SmackDown, Adrian Neville defeats him, so Jericho responds with a low blow. Or maybe it was during the match, Jericho hit him with a low blow to avoid losing, and he got disqualified. No, Adrian Neville won. I believe that was what happened. And then it looked like Jericho was going to shake his hand, but instead got him with a low blow. Jericho turns heel on Neville. This leads to the match at Battleground, which Jericho wins. He defeats Neville, and this is starting to establish Chris Jericho as a top heel on SmackDown. This will, of course, eventually lead him to an Intercontinental Championship match, to an Intercontinental Championship victory down the road, but we're not quite there yet. As for this match, it was a good match, but it wasn't like a pay-per-view tier match. It really didn't need to happen on Battleground. I could have done it on another episode of SmackDown, but at the time, that's not how I ran things. So, the match was okay, but yeah, would have been fine on just a regular episode of SmackDown. I wouldn't say it's a point against SmackDown here, but it's not really in their favor. It's just a match that sort of happened. Then we move into the WWE title match, Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns. Okay, yeah, home on the Roman Reigns. What am I saying? This matchup was completely forgettable. Definitely one of the low points in Lesnar's title reign, which is kind of sad because Lesnar, he won the title at SummerSlam. He had a very shocking title victory. So there's a lot of attention on this guy. Then he destroys John Cena at Night of Champions, which was fine, but after that there was nobody really to step up to challenge him. Roman Reigns, I had to throw Reigns in there because there was nobody else. And even then, Roman Reigns wasn't exactly the most deserving challenger, so he falls short here at Battleground, and then Lesnar's just going to lose the title at Survivor Series. So it's like, you built up Lesnar for what? I mean, what exactly did he do with the title? I mean, Night of Champions wasn't exactly a personal match. Lita just named it. It's not like Cena had to earn the shot. Roman Reigns, how did he get the match? He beat somebody. Probably some sort of number one contenders match against, I don't know, would he have maybe beaten Sheamus? I really don't even remember how Reigns got this title shot. But he gets it and he loses. That's really it. Very lackluster main event for SmackDown. So then we kick it to Monday Night Raw, who closes the show with the ultimate main event, Ryback defending his World Heavyweight Championship against Randy Orton. Now this matchup, it was a little lackluster in the build-up, I would say, but that's because I was mostly relying on the pre-existing history between Ryback and Randy Orton, because if you're not familiar with WWE 2K14, Ryback and Randy Orton had a pretty long-standing rivalry. 3 pay-per-views in a row they fought over the Intercontinental title. Well, technically, Survivor Series was Team Ryback versus Team Orton, but these two men had history. Randy Orton was kind of the guy responsible for getting Ryback to the current status that he had in the first place. A way to really elevate Ryback's Intercontinental title reign from just a standard mid-card reign to pushing him into the upper mid-card, which would eventually transition him to the main event. Really plant the seeds that Ryback could be a future world champion. And for Randy Orton, he hadn't had a world title shot since the Royal Rumble, hadn't been the world champion since Night of Champions of the year before. So for Randy Orton, it was a way for him. He was trying to resurrect his career, and ultimately, if he wanted to do that, he would have to go through the man who really sparked the downward spiral he would have in the first place, and that is Ryback. Of course, Ryback gets the win here. He defeats Randy Orton. Matchup was pretty good. Definitely a better closer than Lesnar versus Reigns. Maybe not one of the best title matches in the history of my series. I threw it in as a match of the year candidate because it was definitely it wasn't bad. I think it was actually pretty good. Probably the best Ryback match, like the best match he would have during his world title reign, because the match with Ziggler was a bit handicapped because Ziggler was injured going into it, so it wasn't going to be a show stealer. His match with Edge was a little lackluster. His match with Christian at Survivor Series was it had the similar story significance with history, but wasn't like a great technical display. Here against Randy Orton, rather, there's a good back and forth, a lot of good false finishes. Orton gets put through an announce table. There might have been a kick out of an RKO, or at the very least it was countered. Lots of back and forth counters. But in the end, Ryback hits the shell shocked, puts Randy Orton away, and that's the way to really establish that, yes, he's here to stay as the World Heavyweight Champion. Which was the thing about Ryback, was that he was going to be, like, when I had initially planned for Ryback to win the world title to take it from Ziggler, I was planning for Ryback to hold that title for, I was thinking Ryback would be the guy to break his own record. Like, he might have even retained the title at WrestleMania. But then, of course, he gets removed from the game in 2K17 because he got released in real life, so I ultimately had to cut Ryback's push short, which, I definitely covered that in a Pretend It Never Happened video. I had to cut it short at Fastlane, which I'll get to in this episode, at the end of this episode, but here it was good to really establish Ryback that he was going to have a long title reign. I mean, unfortunately, that wouldn't happen, but this was still a good match. Definitely the best of Ryback's title reign, the title reign that I unfortunately had to cut short, but it was a good main event. Like I said, much better than Lesnar versus Reigns. At least here there was a story behind it, let alone a pretty good story, if I had to say so myself. But is it one of the most memorable title matches in the history of the series? No, even in the Match of the Year candidate, for the Slammy Awards, I would even say that the CM Punk versus John Cena match at Money in the Bank had more. Like, I thought it was a a higher octane match, very back and forth, a lot of really strong false finishes. The story might not have been as strong as it was for Ryback Orton, but because it's Ryback, his moveset is only so, like, I even gave him, like, the Ultimate Warrior splash, the military press splash combo. I gave Ryback some additional moves, but ultimately Ryback, until I had more of a chance to develop his arsenal, which unfortunately I wouldn't get because I had to cut his title reign short. But yeah, it's incredible for a Ryback match, but at the same time, compared to some of the other stuff that I've done, especially once you get to like WrestleMania in 2K17, yeah, it doesn't really hold a candle. It falls short, but I do think it's still a really good match. One of the best of 2K16, just not even like top 3, but it might be in top 5, at least top 10. But as far as Battleground goes, gotta give the edge to Monday Night Raw, because looking at the SmackDown matches, Lesnar versus Roman Reigns was underwhelming. Adrian Neville versus Chris Jericho didn't even need to be on the pay-per-view. And Owens versus O'Neal was good, but not as good as Ambrose and Zayn versus Blake and Murphy. Not as good as Ryback versus Randy Orton. Heck, even the championship triple threat matchup at least had the shock of Cesaro losing the title to Baron Corbin. So yeah, Raw definitely has the advantage here, which gives them a 13-7 lead now. Last time I had accidentally said that Night of Champions would that would go to SmackDown, but I forgot that the title versus title match was not brand exclusive, so I don't know why I said that SmackDown would get the point for that, which then would put everything on Raw. So SmackDown's really falling short, and this is the dark ages for SmackDown, especially in the main event scene, because Bryan and Punk were taken out. Cena gets taken out for a bit. He takes a month off. Reigns just kind of had to fill the role because there's no one else left. Luckily, Survivor Series taking the belt off of Lesnar would fix that, because then you got Kevin Owens and Titus O'Neil are also in the mix. Then once Lesnar gets taken down, I get a little more time to flesh out more of a main event roster while also establishing Kevin Owens as a dominant champion. But as far as where I'd rate this pay-per-view in comparison to everything else, I would actually, I have to give it the advantage over Night of Champions, honestly, because Night of Champions just had a lot of stinkers on the card. You had the Ascension versus Kid and Swagger, which was a bore, or kind of pointless rather. Lesnar and Cena was underwhelming. Ryback versus Edge was especially underwhelming. But yeah, there's like some of the other matches were then okay, or even good. Like Ambrose versus Rollins was good. Cesaro versus Titus was good. Definitely the match of the night. But Battleground is just a little more consistent. There's less unimportant stuff happening. I mean, yeah, Lesnar and Roman Reigns were underwhelming, as well as Neville versus Jericho. But in saying that, like, Neville versus Jericho wasn't a bad match. It's just that, like, if it was a main event of a SmackDown episode, it would have been probably one of the best SmackDown main events for the year. But just being on a pay-per-view, it was just overshadowed by everything else. Christian versus, like, all these matches are setting up something, except maybe that Neville-Jericho match. There's no direct result of this. Like, Jericho doesn't directly go into an Intercontinental title feud or anything like that. But, yeah, Battleground, it's above Night of Champions, but I can't put it any higher than that. It was a really solid show, just didn't quite have enough in it to really push it over the top, to really make it one of the greats so far. Now it's the big time, baby. Survivor Series. You know that this show is gonna be the best so far. I mean, this clearly, in my mind, it topped SummerSlam by, I might even say, a pretty wide margin, because SummerSlam, some of the matches that took place on that card, like, I wouldn't say there was a bad match on the SummerSlam card, well, except the Battle Royal was a little lazy. Like, the Ascension New Day was a tad underwhelming. Yeah, those were the two. And Rollins McMahon was kind of, I mean, it did what it had to do, but yeah, it was a little underwhelming. There were a couple of matches that weren't necessarily bad, but yeah, like I said, underwhelming. With Survivor Series, though, I think most, if not all, of the matches delivered, at least in whatever they needed to. Some of them might not have been as like high stakes as the others, but no match fell flat. I think this was a really solid card. Every match delivered in the capacity that it needed to. If it was a more minor match, like a mid-card battle, then it still delivered really well. If it was a main event, then it really knocked it out of the park. So we start things off with Monday Night Raw, the United States Championship match the rematch as Cesaro cashes in his rematch clause on Baron Corbin. Now, of course, Baron Corbin was not going to lose the title here. This was the final shot in Cesaro's downward spiral. He uses his rematch, tries to take down Baron Corbin, but I can't have Corbin lose here because Corbin just won the thing. He would look incredibly weak. And when you take a look at where Baron Corbin is in the series right now, it's obvious that I was setting Corbin up to be a big deal in this series. I had big plans for the guy. So having him lose to Cesaro here would have killed any of those for the most part. Because he just won the title at Battleground. To lose it immediately, it would be a very underwhelming title reign, very disappointing, and it'd be hard for Corbin to recover from that. So at Battleground, he kind of just was more like a vulture. He just kind of picked up the scraps to pin Cesaro. Here, he beat Cesaro definitively. And obviously, if Cesaro is going to be moving up into the world title picture in the future, this also sets up Baron Corbin as having the similar potential. If he beats Cesaro here, this is now 2 months in a row, 2 pay-per-views in a row, that Corbin has pinned Cesaro, who goes on to become the World Heavyweight Champion. So Baron Corbin's looking pretty good. And in the future, I mean, Corbin definitely does. You could see him being a World Championship contender because Cesaro, up to this point, has been built as a future World Heavyweight Championship contender. But even he falls short when he fights Baron Corbin on both occasions. So, I mean, this match was pretty good. I mean, compared to the rest of the card, doesn't stand out as much, but it was very good. A good opener. Get people excited, but also having Corbin score the win here, because now he's also a part of Team Rollins. Oh, no, wait. No, he hadn't joined Team Rollins yet. Never mind that. But Corbin getting the win here over Cesaro does kind of plant the seed, because you have the heel win in the opening matchup, so it does kind of plant the seed that, well, maybe, like with the main event, maybe things aren't going to turn out the way that we hope. Well, this really is just a running theme throughout the majority of this card. Usually on the big shows, WWE will have the babyfaces win, but I feel like for Survivor Series, this is a good, like, you're going into the Royal Rumble and WrestleMania, and coming off of SummerSlam, so I feel like Survivor Series is a good show to have all of your heels win, or not necessarily all of them, but a good chance to build up the bad guys, to make them look strong going into the big payoffs that might come later. So Corbin beats Cesaro here. We then move on to what I think next was the tag team title match. Non-brand exclusive. We have Finn Balor and Hideo Itami defending against the Lucha Dragons. Because we got rid of the Ascension, they had their rematch on an episode of Main Event and lost, so we got to pick a new tag team. This matchup, fairly standard. Lucha Dragons won a number 1 contenders match to get this opportunity, but the match itself, I think, was really impressive. Some people even threw it in as the potential match of the night candidate. It was pretty good. I mean, it does kind of boil down to just the high-flying, high spots. You have Balor and Itami do simultaneous suicide dives, but also then later in the match, the Lucha Dragons pull off simultaneous suicide dives. So it's a very, very fast-paced, high-octane match. Good way to keep the crowd hyped, but this time, it's a match between 2 baby faces. So this is one of the only matches of the night where there is no chance of a heel winning. I mean, the baby faces get the win in the end, because obviously there is no heel team in this matchup, so the heels could not have won. But Balor and Itami retain the titles here. The Lucha Dragons, I mean, they were supposed to look impressive here, which they did, but it was too early to get the belts on them. Balor and Itami had just won them from the Ascension at the last show, so it's similar to Baron Corbin, where there was no reason for them to drop the belts here. Then we jump into the Intercontinental Championship match between Stardust and Darren Young. Now, of course, Kevin Owens had vacated the title so that he could fight for the WWE Championship in the main event later on, but here we have some number 1 contenders matches. I believe Stardust had defeated Adrian Neville, and Chris Jericho had lost to Darren Young. I think that's how the number 1 contenders matches were set up. I mean, you can fact check me if you want. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. I remember for a fact that Darren Young beat Chris Jericho, because Jericho made a point of saying that Darren Young was just O'Neill's sidekick. He was just the weak link of the primetime players. But then Darren overcame Chris Jericho to really kind of disprove that. But ultimately, he didn't really disprove it, because he lost to Stardust here. And as much as I would like to have given, like, I really would have liked to give Darren Young the title here, unfortunately, like Stardust, I'd been building him up to this point. There was no way he was going to lose here. Having him lose would have just been backwards. Like, both guys could have used the win, but ultimately I think Stardust could use it more. I think he had earned it, because Stardust was a Universe Mode original. Darren Young came in a bit later, and he had tag team titles on the brain at first. Stardust, his ultimate goal was the Intercontinental title. So, of course, he was going to beat Darren Young here. Now we get into the thing of who really won this match, because Cody Rhodes, his journey was for the Intercontinental title, and it was Stardust who won here, who prior to this point was for sure Cody Rhodes. But then we get into the little retcon I made in 2K17, where Stardust was not Cody Rhodes at this point. It was actually Austin Aries in disguise. Now, I can tell you right now, that storyline was not planned at this point. Like I said, it was a retcon. I came up with it after the fact. I had considered potentially having somebody not, like, having Stardust not be Cody Rhodes, somebody impersonating him. But I had ultimately decided not to go through with it at this point. But then later on, I changed my mind. But then I thought, well, okay, but when did Stardust, when did Cody Rhodes get replaced as Stardust? When did Austin Aries take his spot? Fun fact, there was I don't know if I'm going to cover this in a what could have happened or not. I might. I think I do actually have an entry for it, but Stardust could have also been Ty Dillinger. I had been tossing, because I wanted it to be somebody who looked kind of like Cody Rhodes, at least. Like, if you put makeup, face paint on, you could kind of believe that it was this guy. Ty Dillinger and Austin Aries were the closest, like, they looked the most alike, because who else would it have been that debuted in 2K17 that could have filled that role? Nobody, really. Like, do you want it to be, I don't know, Braun Strowman? Does Strowman look like... No, Strowman does not look like Cody in the slightest, so that wasn't gonna happen. So ultimately, it came down to Aries and Dillinger, and I decided to go with Aries, because I felt with Aries' prior career, because I know he dressed up as Suicide, aka Manic, before, I believe. At least I heard from hearsay. I was talking with Heel Diggy about this at the time, because he knew, like, he was the guy I talked with about this storyline in the very beginning, thinking of what to come up with. With Dillinger, it didn't quite fit into his character, because he's the perfect 10. I could have played it off as more of a heelish gimmick, which is, I mean, the perfect 10 works either way, but having him come in here just didn't quite seem to fall in line with his character, whereas with Austin Aries, he seems like a more, at least his character, the character of Austin Aries, the greatest man who ever lived, seems like a more conniving guy. He's willing to stoop lower to get what he wants. So I decided to go with Aries over Dillinger, but again, I didn't make that decision until 2K17, and I retconned it later, which fortunately, it worked. There are, like, the upcoming feud with Chris Jericho looks a bit weird, when you think then that that's actually Austin Aries talking as Cody Rhodes, because, again, I hadn't thought of it at that point. I thought it was just Cody Rhodes. So you look at that, and that's a bit iffy, but it doesn't, I don't think it fully breaks it. Like, there's no immersion breaking plot holes, and if there are, somebody can let me know. But as far as I'm aware, I didn't, like, cause any plot holes in that, by retconning it later on. But it worked, but at this point, I didn't realize that. But yeah, so technically, Austin Aries beat Darren Young here, and I'll delve more into that storyline once we get into the 2K17 shows. Following that, we had a singles match representing Monday Night Raw between Samoa Joe and Randy Orton. This matchup, it did what it needed to. It was a good match, mostly just to set up bigger things. You have Samoa Joe, who had lost at Battleground. He comes in and he defeats Randy Orton. This is what sets up Randy Orton as the rookie killer. This sort of lays the groundwork for that mindset. But yeah, Orton, he had come off his world title loss, and this is the point where the memes started, where everyone said that I was, by everyone I mean like 2 or 3 people, were saying that I was burying Randy Orton just because he had lost 2 pay-per-views in a row, and it's like, oh boy, he's getting buried. And maybe some matches on Raw as well. But Samoa Joe needed the win here. Why would I give Orton the win in this scenario? Samoa Joe was the new guy. He had lost his debut at Battleground, so he needed Like, he needed to bounce back if anybody was going to take him seriously. So giving him a win over a former world champion and the former number one contender for the title, Randy Orton, was probably the best way to build Joe back up to give him some credibility. Because, like, before, he wasn't the one pinned in the Battleground triple threat. Cesaro just kind of knocked him out on the outside, and Cesaro took the pin. That was also kind of the reason why Cesaro took the pin, to keep Joe looking strong. But here at Survivor Series, there was no reason for Orton to win. Orton put up a good fight against Joe. It was a very back-and-forth match. But ultimately, this was to set up a rematch at Fastlane, which would be a street fight, which I'll get back to later. But it was a good match, a point in favor of Raw. And Samoa Joe got a win that he desperately needed. And, yeah, he would lose at the next show, which is, I don't know, he's kind of 50-50 at this point, but I think that does play into the foundation of his character, setting up kind of, like, obviously it wasn't directly meant to set up his heel turn in 2K17, but I think the foundation of it, it gave me plenty of room to work with that, to enforce the heel turn in 2K17. So I think it's a good foundation there. Not intentionally or directly setting up the plot threads for that, but I can look back on it later and easily pick up on it with no problem. Then we have John Cena versus Bray Wyatt, jumping back over to the blue brand. And in this matchup, we have John Cena, who has come off the loss at Night of Champions. He was injured, so he disappears for a month. He comes back, and Bray Wyatt sets his... Actually, what happened was, Lesnar had really just obliterated Cena at Night of Champions in the main event. Oh, not the main event, but in the WWE title match. But then Bray Wyatt shows up after the match and lays Cena out with his sister Abigail. So when Cena returns, this is where we start to plant the seeds for Cena's heel turn as well. Because he comes back, he's a little more aggressive, he's fixated on Bray Wyatt, he wants to get some payback on him, and Bray Wyatt coming off with a victory at SummerSlam, and then, of course, assaulting Cena at Night of Champions. Wyatt's looking good. This is where we really start to set up the idea of Bray Wyatt being the master manipulator. The thing with Roman, it doesn't quite apply to Roman Reigns. Roman Reigns was kind of a special exception, but at this point, we now have Bray Wyatt really getting inside people's heads. Bray Wyatt is the one who really, he's the catalyst that makes Cena turn heel to turn his back on Sting later on. Going into his next feud with Sting, he'll take Sting down, and then if you watch Battleground, you see that Bray Wyatt Battleground 2K17 now, or 18 now that I'm talking about it. Really the foundation of his feud with Dean Ambrose right now is similar to the thing with John Cena, where he's getting inside his head and he's playing to those more aggressive tendencies. So maybe, you never know, maybe Bray Wyatt is going to do the same thing with Ambrose. I mean, he abducted Ambrose at Battleground, so things are looking tricky there for Ambrose. But with John Cena, he flips the switch here, he beats him at Survivor Series, and that's going to lead to John Cena's heel turn. At least at this point, going into Fastlane, because then you have Sting show up here after the match, because Bray Wyatt looks like he's going to injure Cena. He's got his head wrapped up in a chair, but then Sting shows up, and then Sting lays out Bray Wyatt with a Scorpion Death Drop. So that's obviously planting seeds for WrestleMania, their match that they're going to have. And as far as, like, long-term booking goes, the only feud I think that eclipsed this as far as, like, having a continuous build-up going into it was Ambrose versus Rollins. Every other WrestleMania match kind of started to fall into place after this one, if I'm remembering correctly. But even with Ambrose and Rollins, there was kind of a month off after Survivor Series where Ambrose gets suspended for a month because he's going berserk, and Rollins, this opens him up to get a world title match. But with Sting and Wyatt, from Survivor Series all the way through to WrestleMania, there's build-up to it. Like, Sting, he's a part-timer, but when he comes back, I don't just have him show up at Survivor Series and then disappear, and then show up at the Rumble, and then like, WrestleMania, we're gonna fight. No, Sting actually does get some other, like, of course at Fastlane, he's gonna have a match. Royal Rumble, he fights John Cena, which is still building into the Bray Wyatt match, especially with Cena's heel turn. Then I think at Roadblock, he takes on Braun Strowman, which is, well, okay, I'll get back to that rivalry later, but I was really proud of the Sting-Wyatt rivalry. Much better than what I did with Sting-Undertaker the previous year. That was terrible. But this matchup was good, and it's planting a lot of seeds for big future storylines. So I'd say this is much like a very strong point in SmackDown's favor. even though the match itself wasn't match of the year caliber or anything, not even match of the night, but it does a fantastic job at laying some very critical groundwork for WrestleMania. So, as far as things go here on the pay-per-view, like individual matches, what it would set up, the only thing that really eclipses it as far as big, long-lasting impact going into WrestleMania is Team Ambrose versus Team Rollins. So, this really is probably, as far as a story significance goes, one of the strongest matches on the show. In terms of presentation, though, not as much. That benefit will go to the other matches on the show coming up. Just not this next one, Ryback versus Christian. This one is more so looking back on history, not really building to anything in the future. It's just Ryback goes over Christian. The match is definitely not the match of the night. It was more so steeped in the history, the story significance of the past, rather than setting anything up for the future or trying to steal the show with this individual match. But it's still a point in Raw's favor, it just gets lost in the shuffle compared to everything else. And then we hit the match of the year from that second season of Universe Mode. It's Team Ambrose versus Team Rollins. You have... Now, of course, with this one, I had to work the mechanics a bit, because it is a 5-on-5 match, but at this point, you could only have 3-on-3, so I worked it. I did a cheap thing where Kane, the director of operations, set the match so that only 3 people could come in at once. And once you got a pinfall on someone, once you eliminated someone from the team, then another superstar would make an entrance. So not only was this a way for me to work within the mechanics of the game, but also it was an excuse to keep Seth Rollins out of the match. It was good for story purposes because Ambrose comes out first as a part of his team. He leads the charge, and he wants to get his hands on Seth Rollins, but Seth Rollins doesn't come out there. He waits till later. So Dean Ambrose, he's got to continue to fight through his men, fight through his lackeys to get to Seth Rollins, which I really think did work for the story of the match itself. Yeah, I had to work within the confines of the game, but I think this was the best way I could have done it. So you have, obviously, Team Ambrose consists of Ambrose, Sami Zayn, Rob Van Dam, Rusev, and Batista. Team Rollins consists of, well, at least going into the match, it was Seth Rollins, Big Show, Wesley Blake, Buddy Murphy, and a mystery partner. Now, obviously, later in the show, it's revealed that the mystery partner is Dolph Ziggler, the former World Heavyweight Champion. This was my way of bringing Ziggler back into the story. And the reason why Ziggler joins with Team Rollins was so that he was promised, because Seth needed a 5th man, so Kane promised him, using his power as the director of operations, he promised Ziggler that if he joined forces with Seth Rollins tonight, he would get a guaranteed world title shot in the future. Little did I know, that world championship, like that guaranteed title match, would take effect far sooner than I had anticipated, because that was my way of getting the belt off Ryback before 2K17. So I'd end up falling back on that really quickly. I didn't think I'd need to use it that soon, but that's what happens. Ziggler, that's how he gets into this match, and it just happened to be my saving grace for the year. So, past me, good thinking. You had no idea what was coming, but you did a great job. You did a fantastic job with the tools you had at your disposal. So the match starts off, it's Ambrose, Van Dam, and Zayn versus Blake, Murphy, and Big Show. I'm not really going to go into the spots in this matchup, particularly not until we get way down to the finish, but you had, I think, the first guy to get eliminated was Rob Van Dam. He takes a chokeslam from Big Show, so Big Show pins him. Then Rusev comes down, and Rusev eliminates Big Show. So then Seth Rollins, I forget. I don't know if Seth was making an entrance, because I know Ziggler comes out last. But I think Ambrose might have run to the back and pulled Seth Rollins out. I think that's what happened. Or Seth Rollins was making his entrance and Ambrose just attacked him. I think it was the first, though. I think that's what I did. So Ambrose just kind of disappears for a bit, but he drags Seth Rollins out to the ring, kicking and screaming. I think that's what I did. Oh yeah, you bet that's what I did. Ambrose, I just went back to check the footage. He walks to the back, and he disappears for a bit, which this actually serves multiple purposes. Not only is it's a good way, like a good character moment, Ambrose just running to the back. He's like, we're not even going to wait for this next entry. I'm not going to wait for Seth to perhaps even send out this mystery guy. I'm going to go back there and bring him out myself. So that's what he does. He goes back, disappears from the match for a bit, and this also is a good opportunity for me to put the focus on Wesley Blake and Buddy Murphy, as well as Rusev and Sami Zayn. So they go back and forth in a tag team match for a bit. Eventually, Ambrose brings Seth Rollins out to ringside. Then we're back to the 6-on-6. We're back to the 3-on-3 until eventually Seth Rollins overpowers Rusev. He gets like a combination buckle bomb and enziguri with Wesley Blake, and then Blake hits him with a frog splash for the pin. So this, the way the pinfalls are spread out, it's kind of given some love to everybody, because you have Big Show eliminate Van Dam, you have Rusev eliminate Big Show, and then Wesley Blake eliminates Rusev, although there's a big assist from Seth Rollins, so it's also a way to keep Rusev looking strong, because there's a bit of a teamwork there. Seth Rollins plays a big factor in how Rusev gets eliminated. But then Sami Zayn gets a roll-up, he eliminates Wesley Blake, and then you have Batista arrive on the scene, and then Dolph Ziggler comes out shortly after him. Big shock reveal, Ziggler is the mystery man. He joins forces with the team. So then we're down to the final 3-on-3. It's Ziggler, Rollins, and Buddy Murphy left to take on Batista, Sami Zayn, and Dean Ambrose. So then Seth Rollins, he eliminates Sami Zayn with a frog splash, because I wanted to have Sami Zayn still look good as far as like surviving in the match. So that's why Rusev went out before him. But ultimately, Sami Zayn does get taken out by Seth Rollins. Then Buddy Murphy is the next to go. He eats a dirty deeds from Dean Ambrose. So with Murphy, there's kind of the same thing there, where one of the like the original guys who were left in the matchup, obviously Ambrose was going to last till basically the very end. But also having Sami Zayn and Buddy Murphy look pretty good. The thing about Murphy, at least in this matchup, it was kind of indirectly the way that I sort of elevated him over Wesley Blake. What I was initially going to do with this team, well, not initially, it wasn't initially, but later on, going through 2K17, I was originally going to, not originally, why do I keep saying that? But I was going to show Murphy being as, the stronger link of the team if I had decided not to, like, if I was going to break them up, have them go as single superstars. But of course, they were just both cut from the game in 2K18, so forget about that. We don't have to worry about saving Buddy Murphy, they're just both gone. But here, it was kind of indirectly me doing that. It was basically just whoever was left, because, like, it's interesting how it was split, because Wesley Blake got the elimination, but Murphy lasted longer. I don't know, it's just, there are different ways in a matchup like this to give somebody strength. You can have them have more eliminations, or you can have them be like the Iron Man. They last the longest in the fight. So Murphy's been eliminated. We're down to a 2-on-2. Then it's Ziggler and Batista get into a bit of a fight. Rollins and Ambrose have some pretty hectic spots. You get like the iconic superplex to the floor. Ziggler delivers an elbow drop on Batista through the table. You get some false finishes with pedigrees and dirty deeds they get kicked out of, because that's kind of a trademark of the Rollins-Ambrose feud, is that they, like, if anybody is kicking out of finishers, these two guys are typically the ones doing it. They have the most memorable track record of doing that. So with Batista and Ziggler taken down on the outside, it comes down to Rollins and Ambrose. This is another one of those showdowns where it's just these two. There's no really outside shenanigans involved in it. It's just the better man gets the elimination. And who is the one who gets the elimination but Seth Rollins? Now, this might have surprised a lot of people at the time, because typically the way that these rivalries will go is the babyface loses and loses and loses, and then at the end of the day, he gets the big win. So some people might have thought that that's what was going to happen here, that there would have been a Team Ambrose victory. This would have been the end, or maybe setting up a new chapter, like one final showdown in the works between the two. But no, Ambrose loses again, and that was just the way that I was booking Ambrose, was that he just loses and loses and loses, and that's a big part of his character development, is that he can't get the win over Seth Rollins, and he becomes so obsessed with it that slowly it starts to tear away at his psyche, which then you do kind of see playing out again at WrestleMania. But yeah, Seth Rollins hits him with a curb stomp, and Ambrose is knocked out of the match, so it's down to Batista against Seth Rollins and Dolph Ziggler. Now, with Batista being the final man, I mean, the shock of Ambrose not being the last one eliminated, let alone, the shock of him not winning, let alone not even being the last man standing for his team, I think that was well worth it, but, I mean, Batista hasn't exactly had the strongest booking in my series, so having him be the last man was a little iffy, perhaps, but there's no way he was going to get an elimination here. The sole survivors end up being Seth Rollins and Dolph Ziggler. Ziggler hits a zigzag, Rollins goes in to finish it off with a curb stomp, so Rollins, I think, had 2 eliminations, no, 3, because he took out the final 3 men on the team. Seth Rollins pinned Zayn, he pinned Ambrose, and he pinned Batista. So, Rollins and Ziggler are the sole survivors. This keeps Ziggler looking good going into a future world title match, and for Seth Rollins, this sets up, because it's Team Rollins versus Team Ambrose, so one of the two had to be the last man standing, had to be among the sole survivors for their team. And in this instance, because Team Rollins won, it was Seth Rollins, and he looked very impressive, scoring 3 eliminations in the match. And of course, this does directly give him his world title match with Ryback at Fastlane. And it was a really good way to close out the show. It was a very strong match. I think that, like, when I look back on it, I don't view it as a match of the year candidate just because, like, while I was playing the match, I could never really get that feeling of, like, oh man, this is really good. This is a great match. Which is usually indicative of me thinking that something could be match of the year worthy. For a match like Punk versus Daniel Bryan, for example, while I was recording that, I knew that I was on to something really good. And the way the spots kept playing out, there wasn't too many, like, mistakes that I had to, like, stop and start with that match. Whereas with the 6-man tag, there's a lot of stop-starting, because I'm piecing together multiple different matches. Because with the way the limitations of the game, that's how I had to do it. But altogether, piecing it all together, I think it was a good result. It ended up being like a 40-45 minute match, which is to be expected, a 5-on-5 elimination, and to also have all the eliminations be pretty convincing. It has to be a long match. That's just how the Survivor Series tag matches work. I think that it might have been a little sloppy in places, like some of the in-between eliminations could have perhaps been a bit better, like Sami Zayn getting a roll-up, that could have been a bit better, but that's just the thing, is that with it also being a tag match and the tag mechanics in the game being generally garbage, I had to make some sacrifices. Like, I had to do whatever I could to just get the eliminations, make sure that my spots weren't spoiled, so yeah, I had to make a few sacrifices here and there, but all in all, I could see why people viewed it as the match of the year. The story was there. The spots, especially down the stretch when there were less people involved, were definitely there. I think it had a very big climax. It wasn't the main event of the show. Like, it didn't close it out, but I think the story told throughout the match was a really strong one. And just as far as technical wrestling goes, there were some really incredible spots in there. So I really like this matchup. It's definitely the best on the card. It was the match of the year, people voted, so it was a really strong one. But then you have the main event, a matchup which, on any other card, would have definitely been match of the night. It was just, unfortunately, it was on the same show as the Ambrose Rollins match. Having this be the main event as opposed to the Team Ambrose Rollins match might have been, it might have been a little underwhelming, because obviously it had to follow that. So maybe the King of the Ring tournament shouldn't have, rather the WWE title match should not have main evented. But, as far as I had set things up, the King of the Ring winner would get a title match in the main event of Survivor Series, kind of like a Royal Rumble thing. So I had restricted myself there, but also I think this matchup was still a good closer. Like, the Ambrose Rollins match could have been the closer, and I think it would have been a great main event. But I think the Lesnar-O'Neal-Owens match delivered more in the spots that I find interesting, and just the names involved, like Brock Lesnar, Kevin Owens, and Titus O'Neil I had built up as a pretty good name in the series. So I think it had the name power to deliver. I think the technicality of the match worked out really well. It was a high-profile match as far as build-up. I think it had all the makings of a good main event. So really, this following the Ambrose Rollins match, I don't think it was too much of a detriment to the triple threat itself. But again, this is where the babyface does not come out on top. It's a heel who leaves with the last laugh. So Kevin Owens, the story with him was that he took away, he beat Titus at Battleground. He had taken away his singles match with Brock Lesnar in the main event. So it would have been the ultimate moment for Titus O'Neil, the greatest way to cement him as a main event WWE champion by having him beat both Brock Lesnar and Kevin Owens in the same night. Unfortunately for him, that was not the plan I had in mind. I had much bigger plans for Kevin Owens than I would have ever had with Titus. So it's Kevin Owens who gets the win here. Having Lesnar win would have been the worst decision of the bunch because I needed to get a new main event guy up there. Having Lesnar beat both of these guys would have just squashed him back down. And then who would have fought Lesnar at Fastlane? I don't know. Would I have brought CM Punk back or Daniel Bryan? I don't know. It just wasn't good. So Lesnar had to lose here. Titus could have won, and it would have been a great way to cement him as a big star in my series, but I felt like I'd already done a pretty good job at making him a credible singles guy. He was one of the longer reigning Intercontinental champions, and he had like the big main event at Night of Champions. I think that was his ultimate moment. Like that and King of the Ring. He had two big pay-per-view moments to stand out. And even then, you could also say SummerSlam in the 2 out of 3 Falls match. That was also another really good one. But Kevin Owens was just the right guy to go with. Kevin Owens, as far as like the future of the series, I had much bigger plans for him. And he would carry the show forward for up until the current day. Kevin Owens has been a very dominant champion. It all started here. And I think it was a very good back-and-forth match. Each guy got to show their stuff. Brock Lesnar got to take out both guys, take him to Suplex City. Titus O'Neil, he even got in a couple Clash of the Titus. I think he got one on Lesnar in the ring, which was a kick out, but then he also took him out on the outside with the Clash of the Titus. But then you also have Kevin Owens, who kind of capitalized on that with a cannonball over the top rope. He took out Titus, tossed Lesnar back in the ring, and then he brought up the package pile driver to put Lesnar away. So it also kept Lesnar looking strong because Owens is bringing out one of his biggest shots, one of his big guns to put Lesnar down. Titus didn't take the pin, so he doesn't look too weak. But ultimately, like, not only was I trying to protect Titus in that regard, but having Lesnar take the pin was the best option because there's no cheapness to it. It's someone beating Lesnar because they are better than he is. And it's a great way to cement Kevin Owens as the next top dog, the next WWE champion. So, it was a really good closer for SmackDown. Definitely one of the best of the night. One of the best matches of the night. If it wasn't, like I said, if it wasn't for Ambrose versus Rollins, this would have been match of the night. But it's really tough to top that. And it does kind of come down to personal taste. Some people did think that the triple threat was better. And I could definitely see why. So, both were really good matches. If you want to talk about a show where you kind of bill it as having multiple main events, like 2 main events, I think this one really lived up to it. Definitely could have built it as a double main event show. But who is going to get the upper hand in this pay-per-view? We already know that Survivor Series was the best. It's the best pay-per-view to date as far as this series is concerned. It's better than SummerSlam because it's just a lot more consistent on top of being great and having higher highs. There's a reason why the Team Ambrose, Team Rollins match was voted above the Championship Scramble. And even then, the triple threat match for the WWE title was really good. But as far as Raw versus SmackDown goes, this one, I mean, I could definitely see a case for SmackDown because John Cena versus Bray Wyatt it was pretty good to set things up for the future. Stardust versus Darren Young at the time was a little Like, if I had known at the time that it was going to be the beginning of the Austin Aries thing, even then I still think it would have been a little in the moment. And then the triple threat was really good. For Monday Night Raw, Ryback versus Christian was okay. Samoa Joe versus Randy Orton was maybe a little better than acceptable. Would I say good? I'd say it was pretty good. Like, there was nothing really wrong with it. Baron Corbin versus Cesaro was good. And then, of course, Ambrose Rollins stole the show. So I think for that alone, Monday Night Raw is going to have the upper hand here. Now, unlike the last Survivor Series pay-per-view, this one only had one traditional Survivor Series tag team matchup, which, having me do 2 of those two of those 5-on-5 matches would have been killer. You would have killed me. I would have died. So there was just no way to fit in another Survivor Series tag match in there. But moving into like the 2K... Now, I don't know if I'm going to make it to Survivor Series in 2K18 or if it's going to be 2K19, but either way, I haven't decided what I'm going to do for the Survivor Series matches. Because with the brand split, you could always do like a Raw versus SmackDown, and that's a good way to get everybody involved. But, see, because I did like how in 2K14 there were 2 Survivor Series tag team matches, but that's just not... With the way that tag team mechanics are, I don't know if that's a style that I can pull off twice. Because with this one in 2K16, there was so much editing involved just to make it work. So, doing 2 of those, it would take an eternity. You'd then have like an hour and a half immediately, like right off the bat. That's going to be confirmed for the card. So I don't know. We'll see what I do with the next Survivor Series pay-per-view, but I definitely think this show is one of a kind. We'll see what I do with it in the future. But yeah, best so far as the pay-per-view goes. And it's another point in favor of Monday Night Raw. This is what I'm talking about. They were the dark ages of SmackDown. They really fell behind. It was very clear, definitely at this point, that Raw had the better main event scene. As far as the mid-card goes, I don't know. SmackDown had a pretty weak mid-card at this point as well, so I don't even know if I can give it the advantage there. But eventually, moving into 2K17, the roster is going to be a lot more filled out. I definitely think that's one of the strengths of 2K17, is that previous years, there was no, like, I think in 2K17, I actually have, like, a full roster where every division has some different challengers. Which one is better than the other varies, like, the quality of each division varies, but prior to that, there would be kind of inconsistent periods of time where there was no real person to step up to take over next in line for, like, the Intercontinental title or the United States Championship. It was a little underwhelming, so I've definitely improved on that going forward. And finally, the last pay-per-view of WWE 2K16, this is Fastlane. And the biggest criticism I have of this show is the commentary. It fucking sucks.
What's up, YouTube? This is MathWiz97, and welcome to the Fastlane pay-per-view, the final episode for my WWE 2K16 Universe mode. And we are coming to you from the Big Apple, New York City.
I hate it. This was the first show that I did in my college dorm, and you can tell that I was shy. I did not want to cause too much noise. I was holding back. I was straining my voice to imitate being loud, but it just sounds terrible. It's very bad.
You've got to be kidding me. Brock Lesnar to the top rope this time. No way, no way! Shooting star press! I never thought we'd see Lesnar attempt that again, but he does. He hits it. 2. No! No way! No way!
And I do think that, on the whole, it drags down the quality of this show, regardless of how well it's booked. Because if not for the commentary, this might be right up there with Survivor Series. This is another really strong card. It was a great way to close out 2K16. So let's go right into it. We have the United States Championship match kicking off the show. On behalf of Monday Night Raw, it's Baron Corbin versus Sami Zayn. This matchup, while not exactly groundbreaking, it was definitely a solid match, a solid opener. Sami Zayn still kind of going through with his leftover baggage against Team Rollins. He goes down to fight Baron Corbin for the U.S. title. Corbin was not going to lose here. Again, it's too soon, and knowing the plans that I have for the guy as a potential main event star, he's not going to lose to Sami Zayn here at Fastlane. So, Sami Zayn loses. He puts over Baron Corbin. He still has a really impressive performance, but now at this point, it's looking like how many times can Sami Zayn have these impressive performances and still come up short, and you expect us to take him seriously? I definitely have had issues like that with Sami Zayn over the course of this series, and I think I still kind of have that issue with him even in the present day. And I'm kind of trying to work to get around that, because I do see a lot in Sami Zayn. I think he's a potential world champion, but I just haven't been able to capitalize on that. And sometimes there are just certain superstars who can't get the spotlight because there's a limited amount of space at the top of the card, and you really have to be careful with who gets up there. And sometimes, like I've talked about this in the past, there are a lot of guys who I'd love to get more, give more spotlight on the show, but I just don't have the time. It's just not enough room on the card. Then we jump into the tag team gauntlet match. This is, of course, not brand exclusive because you've got 5, or was it 6? There were 5 or 6 different tag teams involved, and the winner would get a the winner would become the number 1 contenders for the tag team titles at the Royal Rumble. They would take on the winner of the Finn Balor and Hideo Itami versus New Day match at the Royal Rumble. So, in this match, we start things off with the newly reformed Primetime Players. See, that's the big reason why Titus wasn't going to get the win at Survivor Series, is because at the end of the day, my plan was to reunite the Primetime Players and have them win the tag titles. So, that's what happens here. Because he had lost the Survivor Series, he's no longer in the main event scene. He's got to find something else to do. So we drop him right into this tag team gauntlet match. He reunites with Darren Young. They start off the match against Wade Barrett and Sheamus. So this was a really good way to put over the Primetime Players. Not only that they are still, at least Titus is still a strong singles threat by taking on two guys who were former challengers for the World Heavyweight title. Sheamus, a former 3-time world champion. So the Primetime Players, they pin and eliminate Barrett and Sheamus. Barrett and Sheamus, at this point, Barrett was not going to be in 2K17, so I had to get him out. There wasn't a future for Sheamus and Barrett as a tag team because of that, so I used them to put over the Primetime Players. Then the Ascension comes out. The Primetime Players fight them off for a bit, but ultimately they're fatigued from their match with Barrett and Sheamus. The Ascension pin and eliminate the Primetime Players, because the thing about the PTP is that I wanted it to be a slow burn, because they just reformed as a tag team, and they did have that historical baggage. I thought it would be way too soon to actually make them the number 1 contenders, so I had them lose here while also still looking good, getting an elimination. But the Ascension comes in and eliminates them. Then the Vaudevillains come down, and they get eliminated by the Ascension. Then Enzo and Cass come down, and they eliminate the Ascension. Because Enzo and Cass, I thought maybe I could get a future out of them as a tag team. Clearly that didn't happen. And the Vaudevillains just really wasn't much I could do with them. They were just lost in the shuffle. So Enzo and Cass take out the Ascension. Then finally Blake and Murphy come down, with the caveat that if they do not win the tag team titles, Seth Rollins will kick them out of Team Rollins. So Blake and Murphy, they beat Enzo and Cass in the finals of the Gauntlet. They become number 1 contenders. They're going to go on to fight Balor and Itami at the Royal Rumble, which I guess then I can just spoil the tag team title match of this show. Balor and Itami, they defeat the New Day. With New Day, I had they had a bit of a story going into this where they had said that, we vow that we will win the tag team titles before the year is out, but obviously they don't. Then the New Day, there's the story with them where they just kind of lose and lose and lose after this. They never make it back to a tag team title shot. They lose and lose and lose, and then eventually they go their separate ways. And yeah, New Day, I just never really had a spot for them on the card. Never really had big plans for them, unfortunately. And because they are so prominently featured on the main roster, I don't feel a pressing need to cram them into my show, because you can just watch main roster WWE and get your daily dose of New Day there. Whereas here I can focus on other talent. So Balor and Itami retain. They go on to face Blake and Murphy at the Rumble. Then we jump back to, I believe it would have been it was either the Intercontinental title match or the street fight. I'm going to say it was the street fight, representing Monday Night Raw, Samoa Joe and Randy Orton. Now this time Randy Orton defeats Samoa Joe, because Orton definitely needed a bounce back win, and this was also a way to establish the rookie killer gimmick. Because if he could defeat Samoa Joe, if he didn't defeat Samoa Joe, he would have just been blowing smoke. And they also run the risk of Orton fading back into irrelevance just like he did on SmackDown. I did not want that to happen, so even if it was at the detriment of Samoa Joe's momentum, I had to have Randy Orton get the win here. And of course, well, now I for Survivor Series, I talked about Cena and Wyatt setting up WrestleMania stuff, but Joe and Orton was actually building up to a WrestleMania encounter as well. This kind of continues to further that storyline, but it's not really continued at the Royal Rumble other than some eliminations in the Rumble match itself, but I'll revisit that storyline in time. This was definitely a point in Raw's favor, just like the Corbin-Zayn matchup, although I think this one might have outperformed it a bit more. Then we go back to the Intercontinental title match, Stardust versus Chris Jericho. Now Stardust has completed a face turn. Chris Jericho is still, of course, the heel. I forget how he got this title match. He did something or other, but he had been insulting Stardust about. Was he insulting like the Rhodes family, or was he talking about the whole Stardust gimmick, the whole face painted stuff, or Gold Dust maybe? I don't know. Jericho did some sort of insults to make this matchup personal, so it wasn't just a guy winning a contenders match and getting a title shot. Jericho did make this personal. There's definitely a story there between Stardust and Jericho. Again, this is the one that's really fishy, because if you go back to it and know that that's supposed to be Austin Aries speaking on behalf of Stardust, yeah, I mean, can you buy into it? I mean, Aries just putting up a really convincing performance of being Cody Rhodes under the disguise of Stardust. It's a really weird storyline, honestly. But yeah, this matchup ends in a double countout because Stardust hits a superplex to the outside. Both men are down for the 10 count. So Stardust retains, but by a double countout, so it's a draw. Then Jericho in 2K17, he will win the Intercontinental title in a no-holds-barred rematch on SmackDown. So Jericho will capture the Intercontinental title, just not on this show. I don't exactly remember why I didn't just let Jericho win here. No, I remember now, because I wanted Stardust's title reign to be a little longer because he had just won it at Fastlane. But I also knew that giving Jericho the belt would have been the right decision going forward, especially looking at the spin I would take on the Stardust character, that Austin Aries would be brought into the mix. So then you had the issue of Stardust's identity, but then you have Chris Jericho poking fun at it, throwing out little quips here and there, just really stoking the flames of that the flames of that feud. So definitely having Jericho in the Aries Rhodes rivalry, Jericho was a pretty key component of that, and I definitely, if you cut him out of that rivalry and you take away the Intercontinental Championship from him during that rivalry, it's not the same. It's a completely different feud. And it's a lot more serious as well. Jericho kind of seeks to have a bit more levity in that rivalry, not take it so seriously. Then we have a tag team match, John Cena and Sting versus the Wyatt family. Or was it the World Heavyweight title match that came first? I'm just going to go with Cena and Sting versus the Wyatts. So obviously Sting returned at Survivor Series, and he set his sights on Bray Wyatt. But John Cena wasn't quite done with Wyatt yet, so Sting and Cena, they work together here. Cena's still a face going into the matchup, but he's definitely very, even going down to the ring, he seems a bit nervous. He comes out to a different entrance, not his usual happy-go-lucky self, because Wyatt is definitely, he's gotten inside his head. And then during the match, Sting, once he gets tagged in, he just kind of clears house, takes out both Harper and Rowan, and then Cena gets a little jealous that Sting was not tagging him in. He just kind of stood on the apron while Cena took the punishment, and then came in to clear house without really, working as a team, so Cena lays him out with an attitude adjustment, and Eric Rowan pins Sting, and the Wyatt family get the win. Cena has turned his back on not only Sting, but the WWE Universe, completing that heel turn, and then he'll go on to fight Sting at the Royal Rumble. This was another pretty good match, still a good story beat in the Wyatt-Sting rivalry, as well as the Cena-Wyatt rivalry. So it's pulling double duty, and it did it well. Not the match of the night by any stretch of the imagination. As far as tag team matchups go, it was all right. It wasn't even one of the best tag team matchups from a technical standpoint, but it served a pretty good purpose. Definitely a point in favor of SmackDown. Then we have the World Heavyweight title match, Ryback versus Seth Rollins. Now, the big talking point of this is not the match itself, not that Ryback defeated Seth Rollins, but it was what happened after the fact, that Dolph Ziggler cashed in his rematch clause after Baron Corbin had assaulted Ryback following his victory over Seth Rollins. And Ziggler would walk out with the world title. So that was my way of writing off Ryback, just giving the belt to Ziggler to carry it through to WrestleMania. So in that sense, Ziggler got his revenge on Ryback. We closed that plot thread left over from SummerSlam, since Ryback was the guy who put Ziggler on the shelf. Ziggler gets his redemption here. Seth Rollins, it was too soon to put the belt on him, because I knew that he was going to end up facing Dean Ambrose at WrestleMania, and I didn't think that rivalry needed the world title, so I thought it would be better to give it back to Ziggler, so that's what I did. Especially after Survivor Series, having Ziggler come back to help Team Rollins and get that guaranteed world title match. Ziggler was definitely going to take the title from Ryback at some point, Don't exactly know when that would have happened, because Cesaro was destined to win the world title at WrestleMania, so sometime between now and then Ziggler would have got it. I think this was the best way it could have worked out. Kind of complete that plot thread of Ziggler and Rollins having an alliance, while also getting Ziggler what he wants, Seth Rollins kind of falling short, getting put back in his place so that he could fight Dean Ambrose at WrestleMania. The matches themselves were pretty good. I mean, Ziggler-Ryback was pretty quick because Ryback was taken out by Corbin as well as fatigued after his match with Seth Rollins. But Ryback and Rollins put on a really good match, actually. And if it wasn't for the main event, it probably would have been the match of the night. But as I just said, there is the main event to worry about. Kevin Owens versus Brock Lesnar for the WWE title. Brock Lesnar cashing in his rematch clause. And this was definitely the match of the night. It was a strong contender for match of the year, even. For a singles match, this one was far better, I think, than Punk Cena, because you had these guys pulling out all the stops. Brock Lesnar giving it everything he's got against Kevin Owens. You have, of course, the F5, I think, got kicked out of. Kevin Owens might have hit a pop-up powerbomb and Lesnar kicked out of it. I don't quite remember. But you had Lesnar hit a shooting star press. That was a big shocker. At least it was supposed to be one of the high spots of the match. You had Owens doing a suicide dive, but then Lesnar answering back with a suicide dive. So Lesnar really was giving it everything he had. But Kevin Owens just had more left in the tank. He beat Lesnar once again with a package pile driver. Another definitive victory. So it's clear that Kevin Owens is here, and he is here to stay. Brock Lesnar, his reign as champion is gone. It's done. No more of Lesnar. He's going to drop down the card. And Kevin Owens is the man to beat now. Kevin Owens has pinned Lesnar twice, 2 pay-per-views in a row, and now it's looking like Owens could be unstoppable, which of course definitely is laying the groundwork for what becomes a very historic title reign. So at the end of the day, Raw versus SmackDown, I would give the advantage to See, that was a close one there. Because Jericho Stardust, it had, like, in the moment, wasn't so great, but looking back on it, it definitely was, a decent setup. This wasn't the, like, when I think of the Jericho Aries Rhodes rivalry, this is probably the least memorable part of that rivalry, though, so that's a little lackluster. Joe Orton, the rematch, was good. Corbin Zayn was serviceable. Ryback Rollins was a good match, but the big thing that came out of it was Ziggler taking the title back. But in saying that, it was I'm not too proud of how that went down. Given the circumstances, it was great, but just in general, having Ziggler kind of come in and steal the world title back, that's not how I would have liked to have done it. I would have rather had Ziggler beat Ryback of his own accord, without any hiccups, without any special asterisks, but that's just how it worked out. But yeah, I think I'm going to give SmackDown the advantage for Fastlane, just because Owens versus Lesnar was fantastic, and the Cena-Sting tag team match was pretty interesting as well. As far as where Fastlane stands on the overall show rating, the commentary is really the only thing that drags this one down. Because, like, there aren't really many shortcomings with this show. In the same way as Survivor Series, it's very strong top to bottom. It doesn't really hit the same lows that some of the other shows reach. You have, like, Stardust versus Jericho was acceptable. Sting Cena was good. There was no, like, we don't have to trim the fat off this show. There's a lot of really good stuff in here. The tag team gauntlet might have dragged on a bit longer than it needed to. Maybe 6 tag teams was a bit much, because you can tell I'm trying to include as many relevant teams as I can, which is crazy to think, because there were qualifying matches for this gauntlet. Not every team had to qualify. Blake and Murphy and the Primetime Players were handed the spot, but Barrett and Sheamus had to qualify. The Lucha Dragons were knocked out. The Vaudevillains had to qualify. So yeah, like, teams that were knocked out of this match, you had Kid and Swagger, they lost a qualifying matchup. The Lucha Dragons got knocked out. They didn't qualify. I don't remember who the other teams were. But yeah, there were a lot of teams in here, maybe more than there needed to be, just to kind of pad out the length of the show, I guess. But it's going to fall short of Survivor Series, just barely. Owens versus Lesnar was really good, and if this show had better commentary, I definitely would rate it up there as a contender for the best show so far. but it falls just short of Survivor Series. I'm going to give it the edge over Money in the Bank, because despite the commentary being lackluster, there aren't really any weak points with the Fastlane card. There were a couple nitpicks I could make here and there, but no matches that were kind of disappointing, that are completely forgettable. Whereas with Money in the Bank, I mean, Titus O'Neil versus Tyson Kidd was pretty forgettable. The Ascension versus the Usos was forgettable. And even the Divas title triple threat match was rather underwhelming. But Fastlane, right underneath Survivor Series and above Money in the Bank. So it's currently the second best show I've covered. We'll see how that fares once we get into WWE 2K17. And I think with 2K17, we're going to see something similar to the 2K15 effect, where these shows kind of, some of the early ones are going to fall under 2K16, but when we get to our really big moments, I think they're going to surpass. Like, WrestleMania is probably going to take the top spot. I don't think that's even a question. But the other shows, we'll see how they fare. Thank you for joining me for another one of these Behind the Universe Raw vs. SmackDown episodes. It's going to be a little bit until we get back to 2K17, because again, once I cover 2K17, I have to wait until 2K18 is done to cover that. And even then, I want to leave a little more time to figure out the fallout of 2K18 to see how that'll impact. So I'll have to even get into 2K19 a little bit before I actually cover 2K18. But in the meantime, I should have I know I have an episode of What Could Have Happened written and recorded. I just got to edit that together. Eventually, I'm going to get another Universe Mode 101 video done, because I have other projects there I want to work on. Just in general, more Behind the Universe stuff, as well as your usual Universe modes, and the 2008 GM Mode Challenge series that'll be coming up as well. So be sure to stay tuned for all of those projects. Be sure to stay tuned for more Behind the Universe, and until next time, keep on YouTubing.